This one's a doozy, so you might want to stick around with it. So last night, I'm like, okay, I'll do another stream for Immersiontale, and I'll basically get everything done. But I ended up just being like, you know what? It might actually not happen if I'm distracted all the time. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, put my head down, do the work, put a load of like good songs that I want on in the background, and just enter the zone and just go with it. So sure enough, I'd been working on all this stuff for New Home, and it's all looking good, and I'm making really good progress. And what I'd done is I'd switched to Blender 4.0, the newest version, primarily because it's supposed to handle stuff a little bit better and make rendering a lot nicer. And I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. So I try it, and of course, me being me, I did not save a backup version of New Home. So once I saved it as a 4.0 file, I couldn't go back from there. And there's some foreshadowing there, because what ended up happening was I get to the very end of doing absolutely everything in New Home, right? I have like a checklist. I go through my checklist. I've got absolutely everything done apart from like incredibly tiny scenery that I can miss out for just the update, and then finish that off at a later point in like another day or whatever. Because all it is really like pictures in picture frames. So I've done everything, and I'm like, okay, I'm satisfied with this. It's running a little bit laggy, but it's whatever. So I'm like, okay, I'll start getting ready to go to sleep, because at this point it was like 6:30 in the morning. I'd been up like all night, and I'm like, okay, I'll start rendering everything, because with any luck, I can get stuff rendered. I can do the video update, as in like record all the extra little bits for it through OBS and do the voiceover and everything. And then we can put it all together, and I can potentially just drop the event on the Undernet and be like, okay, let's see what's going on. Let's see whose attention we can get and what kind of reaction we can get out of it. So essentially, I'm in like the final stretch for doing this update. And what ends up happening is the moment I hit render, it just decides, you know what, I'm going to crash. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's weird. So I go back in, I hit render again, and it starts rendering. But everything in my camera view looks terribly dark compared to everything in my actual viewport. So my viewport has this really nice lighting that makes everything look very dusty and mysterious. And I'm like, okay, where's my atmosphere? Where's my lights? Why is it all really dark instead? That's weird. So I end up trying to fix it, and I just can't find anything. So then I go on the Undernet, and I hit up Bakers in DMs. Bakers is the person that helped out with Heartland, who helped me with some of the materials, and is basically like 3D support. If I ever have any trouble with anything, because Bakers knows Blender better than me, I just go to Bakers and be like, hey, do you know how to do this thing? Or do you know how to do this efficiently? So I hit up Bakers, and I'm like, hey, I got a problem here. Can you help out? And Bakers is like, well, what's going on? So I explain everything. And Bakers is like, I have no clue what's going on there. You better send me the file. So I send Bakers the entire New Home file without textures. And Bakers opens it and goes, I'm not quite sure. And I'm like, well, it can't be like too drastic, because otherwise it'd mess up the entire file, right? So we're both trying to go through and figure out what it is. And I'm looking at my atmospherics, because Bakers is like, yeah, for some strange reason, it's really dark. If you put like any other settings on, and I'm like, the only thing I can think of is it's the fog. And sure enough, I turn the fog off and everything goes fine. And I'm like, well, that's weird, because atmospheric fog normally doesn't do that. So I go ahead and I get rid of the fog and then render it just as a test render, and everything looks good. And I'm like, okay, well, now I'm missing my volumetric fog, which I actually need to hide parts of the map and also give it a little bit of atmosphere. So now I'm like, oh, great. So we turn the fog on, but I mess around with the floor fog. That's like a a thin mist, as it were. But it's still, the lower you get, the more it covers up bottomless pits and things like that. So I'm like, okay, I changed that. Let's see what happens. I hit render again, and sure enough, it works. So I'm currently just rendering stuff. But what I skipped out on was a major point where before Bakers got contacted by me in DM, I was literally trying everything. I'm like searching up on Google for a good like hour or two, I think it was, trying to figure out stuff. I'm messing around and trying to see whether there's anything else, like any other way that I can get this file from Blender 4.0 back to 3.5, what I'm using. And everything that I'm looking up isn't giving me the correct answer. Instead, it's giving me like, oh, you can buy this add-on that gives you a user interface if you want the 3.5 user interface in 4.0. And I'm sat here going, I don't want that. I just want to be able to get my file back. And then somebody's like, well, you might have to export it as an FBX and then import it into 3.5. I'm like, okay, so what's the deal here? So I go and look at exporting it as an FBX, which is like a standard 3D format. So I export this FBX and I import it back into 3.5, which I've been using for the entire project, more or less, just to see what happens. And yeah, it gives me the basic geometry. Doesn't give me any of my nodes that help me control the randomness of the buildings, so I have no scenery buildings. It doesn't give me my fog or anything else like that. It completely gets rid of all my shaders, so I would have had to do all that again. And on top of that, it's like, so yeah, all the stuff that you organized over the past, like, God knows how long you've been working on this, all that stuff that's organized, yeah, there's no files for that or anything, so you've now got like a random assortment of files that aren't even named correctly, just thrown in Blender, so it's going to take forever if you want to organize these things again. And I'm just like, oh, grand. You know, so at this point, I was thinking, oh, the update's just gone. It's going to take like another week or so, or however long it would have taken to get that version up and running. But then, of course, Bakers is like, dude, you can just backwards compatible it. And I'm like, how? And Bakers is just like, well, Blender 3.6 is good for backwards compatibility. And even though that didn't really spell it out for me, I was like, okay, let's just see if I can get 3.6 from Steam. And then I'll just open the file in that and see if it works. Because when I tried opening it in 3.5, it just would not work. So yeah, 3.6 just opens the file, and then next minute I'm like, okay, save, back up, you know, so I just backed up it like 3 times or something. And funny enough, it works better in 3.6. For some strange reason, it just works better in 3.6, so I'm getting some rendering done now. And then once the rendering is done, like I said, I'll be trying to put all the extra bits together for the update here, so the update should, hopefully, be very soon. So yeah, that was the story of how I almost lost the entirety of New Home, and also potentially would have held the update back quite a long period of time if it wasn't for Bakers. So yeah, thank you very much again to Bakers for all the support, and I shall see you guys later on after I get some sleep. It's like 9:30. I have still not slept yet. Anyway, bye.